Good morning, everyone. I'm Yaya Han, and I'm here at Carolina Game Summit. It's the last day, and I'm dressed up as the character Zenji from the video game series Dynasty Warriors. So I'm here as a cosplay guest and to share my experiences of being in the cosplay community for the last 20 some years. I make all my costumes and I have entered contests, I've won contests, and then eventually for the last decade and a half, I've been judging contests and sharing, my knowledge about cosplay and encouraging people to cosplay. So I'm deeply ingrained in the fandom and cosplay world. And that is very closely married to the gaming world. So I've cosplayed a lot of gaming characters. I play games myself, and I think it's really cool to have an event that encourages cosplay and also celebrates gaming. So today's panel is called the Yaya Han World of Cosplay book panel because in 2019, I wrote a book that's called Yaya Han's World of Cosplay. And it's the first book of its kind about cosplay culture. I actually have a PowerPoint so I can share a little bit. So yeah, why a book? Like, why have I decided to write a book? And why is it not a tutorial book like many other cosplayers have focused on educational books? And that's because I think there really is or was a lack of understanding of the sociology of cosplay, where modern cosplay came from, and what this community truly is about. So I really wanted to write a book that sort of chronicled my own story, how I discovered cosplay and how I grew up in the cosplay community, and also to delve into the history of modern cosplay. So I go in the book and I'll share with you a little bit that fan costuming really came in different stages, and modern cosplay is sort of what I categorize the last 20 some years, starting really in the year 2000. And that sort of community developed into what we currently know as modern cosplay. So I also have a lot of information about cosplay culture in there, and it is, autobiographical because my life is so intertwined with cosplay, and I also didn't want to speak for all cosplayers. So the way that I wrote the book is very personal and interweaves my personal experiences that, give people a good insight into this world. But, I really do not presume to speak to everyone, which is probably why my publisher insisted on the name Yaya Han's World of Cosplay. Anyway, so I think probably what I want to do is just sort of go through real quick what the different chapters are in the book to give you an insight, because I find that it's very confusing for people to ask me about the book. They think that it's like crafts, it's got to be like crafting book related, or it's a photo book. And I have to tell people, no, it is a cultural book. So I'm going to go through with my slides and sort of share a little bit about what each chapter is about, and hopefully give you more of an insight into this book that I spent a better part of a year of my life creating. And before I start, I just want to say that my goal with this book is for people to pick it up, whether they are cosplayers or whether they want to cosplay, or whether their kids are interested in cosplaying, and parents are trying to find out more about this world that they are about to let their kids, enter. My goal is that if you read the book, that afterwards you have a well-rounded understanding of what cosplay is, and not just the activity. Like, that you really understand what makes us tick, why we do this, and why you should also maybe cosplay as well. So after the introduction chapter, I should say that my book is divided up in 5 parts, just to keep things a little more organized for myself while I was writing it. And the first part is called Welcome to the World of Cosplay. It is certainly an introductory part. Chapter 1 is what is cosplay and who are you? And so I go through explaining what I do for a living, and that I consider myself a weekend celebrity where I am very normal in everyday life. But on weekends, I go to conventions, I dress up as fictional characters, and people will come up and ask me for autographs and such. So as like, I do events that like normally maybe like a film actor or voice actor would do, but then I go back home on Monday and I'm just Yaya. So weekend celebrity. And also, like, I talk about in this chapter just really how influential cosplay has become, and fandom has just made such an impact on all parts of our world, our lives. It's like the pop culture is cool now, and being a comic book fan and video game fan is now considered lucrative and cool instead of nerdy and weird. And so cosplayers also are enjoying this sort of appreciation for what it is that we do. So chapter 2 in part 1 is where I go all the way back to my childhood and where I came from. And I have a very interesting history. I was born in China, like in the early 80s, right after the Cultural Revolution. And so I had a very, very different upbringing. But then my parents divorced and my mother moved to Germany. And then she took me with her as a young child. And so I grew up in Germany. I had to learn German. I had to sort of like assimilate into this very different culture by myself. And, so growing up, I was a very awkward teenager, and I was an avid reader and avid drawer. So I read a lot of manga, because right before I left China, I had gotten into manga, and I like discovered the beautiful world of anime, through Saint Seiya and Sailor Moon. And so when I got to Germany, it was very, very weird, because nobody was into any of that. That was like unknown there. So I would read these comic books, that are in Chinese, because they were like translated to Chinese. And I would draw these characters, and my classmates thought I was insane. But that sort of is like what shaped me as a creative person, I think. Like, I was so introverted and so awkward, and it sort of made me want to escape into a different fantasy world, which eventually leads to this, to actually like make whatever it is to escape and become a fantasy. But yeah, that's definitely my foundation. So that's chapter 2. And then throughout the book, I have advice chapters. So this was sort of a request from the publisher. They really wanted me to intersperse crafting advice and actual like hands-on advice into the book. So after each part, there are 5 parts. After each part, there's an advice chapter. And the first advice chapter is about starting a costume. And I, give very honest and very realistic points on how you should prep and how you should choose a character and how you should time manage and such. Important if you want to get started with cosplaying. Part 2 is called The History of Cosplay, because of course we need to understand, where did all of this come from? And the chapter 3 in that is called The Boomerang Effect. I was very proud of this title, because I sort of had this idea that cosplay as we know it didn't actually originate from the East. Because when I started cosplaying in the year 2000, really cosplay was very, very popular at anime conventions, and we were cosplaying video game characters from Japanese titles, Street Fighter, Fatal Fury, and all of those. And we really all thought that cosplay came from Japan, like they made gorgeous costumes. There were like Japanese cosplayers that did amazing things, but truly cosplay or costuming came from the United States. It actually originated at the 1939 World's Fair. And here you see the couple on the left that made the first fan costumes. And then I have pictures throughout the book with people from the 50s and 60s all the way up to the 80s and 90s that participated in sci-fi conventions here in the United States. And what happened was a Japanese journalist and editor came to a Worldcon, to one of the sci-fi conventions in the US, and saw that people were dressed up, and he brought it back to Japan. And so I was able to get permission to print the article that he wrote for his magazine, where he actually coined the term cosplay. So that was like, had to hunt down the contact to get permission for that. And on the right, you see photos of Japanese cosplayers at Anime Expo 1999, which was my first convention, and where I cosplayed very badly, but saw these Japanese cosplayers that just blew my mind with how beautiful and perfect they looked. And so the Boomerang effect really is that, these Japanese cosplayers were inspired by what, kind of came back from the West, and then they traveled to the US and in turn, inspired all of us here in the West to like aspire to their level. But here you can see my first costume on the left. I'm standing with a couple that bought an artwork that I did because, like I said, I grew up actually just drawing most of my life until I found cosplay. And I'm wearing a very, very unrecognizable costume from the manga Yu Yu Hakusho. Dressed as Kurama, and I sold them that piece of art, and that's the only photo of me in that costume ever. And so when I found it, I was like, yes, like in my basement, I found this photo. I'm like, we have to scan it, book. So I continue on after I sort of talk about the general history of cosplay. Chapter 4 is called How Cosplay Saved My Life, and kind of dramatic, but my editor was like, well, that's kind of what it was, so let's do it. So like you can see me in a one of the earliest costumes I made it's a wedding dress, because I was very obsessed with Final Fantasy X, and Yuna, the main character, has a wedding dress that I was like, I need to make this wedding dress for cosplay. But like, I really, really was very lucky to discover cosplay because I immigrated to the United States as a teenager by myself against the wishes of my parents. And it was very, very rough. Of course, it was very, very rough. I had no idea at the time, but I felt definitely like I never belonged in Germany, and I couldn't find my people. I couldn't find like where I really wanted to be. And so it was kind of weird to go to an anime convention in the United States. And, I was on an exchange school program. I was only going to be here for a year, and like just falling in love with that culture, that community, that life, and everybody appreciating my art. People wanted to give me money for art. Like they wanted to pay me to draw for them. And it was just such an amazing, eye-opening year that I fought tooth and nail to stay. And then, of course, had to go through all the pitfalls of immigrating to this country by myself. So if I had not had cosplay during that time, if I had not continued to go to conventions, make costumes, stay in touch with friends, meet new friends, I would have turned tail and I would have just crawled back to Germany. I know that. So that's why I feel like cosplay really saved my life, because it gave me direction at a young age where I was completely lost and had no idea what I was going to do in my life. So chapter 5 is an anecdote, a story about my first Best in Show win at a convention where I made a costume called the Fire Fairy, and my friends and I, we organized a Elemental Fairies group. And crazy enough, this was at Animazement in Durham, North Carolina. And I know Animazement has moved to Raleigh now in this very convention center. But in the year 2000, it was in Durham, and we drove up from Atlanta, and we finished our costumes in the hotel room, and we performed, and we won Best in Show. And I remember we won $300, and that was like a fortune. We was like, we won money? We can divide this among us? And so that's a funny chapter. So chapter 6 is called The Growing Pains of a Fringe Culture. That's a picture of lots of cosplayers dressed from the anime Slayers at an early convention taken on a disposable camera. So this chapter sort of goes through like the early 2000s, after I'd been in cosplay for a few years, and cosplay was still a very small, tight-knit community, and some of the problems that we ran into, like gatekeeping and people, sort of trying to claim characters for each other, like being like, I am the only Sailor Moon. No one else can be Sailor Moon. I'm the only one who can be Sailor Moon. And there was also sort of the start of like websites. Like we didn't have social media, so some cosplayers, made actual like websites on GeoCities or Yahoo.com or something. And like I was one of the first cosplayers who had a website with a gallery, and like that looked pretty good. And sort of the issues of like people were really against you promoting yourself because you're supposed to be just a fan, and I think that is sort of this indication whenever a niche culture and community becomes a little bigger and certain individuals are able to, kind of stand out a little bit, the instinct is just to be like, pull them down, don't mess up this community, don't speak for us. So I go through some of those like not so nice things that I experienced that other cosplayers have experienced. And I truly feel like that's what it is. These are growing pains, that sometimes still persist to this day because cosplay keeps evolving. So that's the end of part 2, and my Yaya's advice chapter follows that, and that's a big chapter on sewing and armor, where I really just try to go through the basics of what you should expect if you want to get into sewing and into armor making. So the hopes is that people can read the book and sort of like understand the culture of cosplay, but then have these advice chapters where they can see hands-on tips for getting into cosplay. So it's not going to have like, I fought to not put tutorials in it because I thought that would really bog down the flow of the book. But this gives you the foundation to then seek out all the resources that are widely available. And I list resources as well so that you can just go, okay, I just now go to YouTube and I search for this, and then I can find what I need. All right, so part 3, I call the creative expression of cosplay. And this was a really fun chapter to write, or a fun part to write, because now we are entering sort of the early, like the late 2000s to early 2010s, where I think cosplay really begins to blossom. And it's beginning to blossom with pop culture, like the success of comic book films, starting with Iron Man, with Marvel. Those elevate like this entire this subgenre, this whole world, and cosplay was pulled along with it. And so there were way more conventions, way more chances for people to hang out. And so this chapter 7, is all about conventions and sort of the the advantages and like of having a space where you can interact with people that are like-minded, but also I go through competitions. So this is also a chapter where I sort of talk about the way that cosplay competitions have sort of evolved over years, and also like how I partook in them, and like how long it took for conventions to actually like put money behind competitions. Oh my gosh. For many years, we just got, you know, whatever dealers would donate. So, like a random toy, random DVD, those were our prizes. Like, and nowadays, like conventions will even have cash prizes, like at Carolina Game Summit. I think yesterday, the first place won $500. I mean, that's really awesome. And that, you know, even 10 years ago would have been very difficult, you know, very rare. So continue on. Chapter 8 is called The Cosplay Guest. This is somewhat of a personal chapter, but I think it's really important because people have no idea where cosplay guests came from. I feel like we kind of are just here now, but I experienced every step of the way. Like I was the guinea pig, one of the very first cosplay guests, and it was so difficult because cosplay is a fan activity. We are not in the industry. We're not making games. We're not voice actors. You know, we're not designers or artists. We are fans first and foremost. But as cosplay became such a draw at conventions throughout the years, like more and more people came just to cosplay, these organizers had to be like, huh, maybe we should have some programming with cosplayers. Maybe they could like teach how to make costumes instead of it just like everybody is just, you know, doing the con with in a costume. Like then when they started doing more events involving cosplay, that's when they started inviting cosplayers as guests. But it was like very questionable for a few years, where like I would work for free. You know, I talk about that in this chapter, where many conventions I just got a badge and I had to like still pay for my own room or find someone to room with, and you know, get myself there somehow and feed myself. And but I would work the whole weekend because it was like so amazing to have any type of programming, you know, related to cosplay. And I love giving panels, I love judging. And so how like slowly over, you know, probably 10 years, now cosplayers, you know, now have a booth where people wait in line for me, and I can actually like request certain compensations and certain like comfort, you know, requirements, like please feed me each day. So that's really great to sort of see that cosplay is finally being recognized as an art form. So chapter 9 is focused on cosplay photography, videography, because that is such a huge part of why cosplay developed so you know richly. I feel like if we didn't have photography, didn't have a way to create gorgeous photos and share these costumes with the world, that it would just not be here, you know. So the artistic aspect of cosplay completely intersects with photography, videography, and then social media. So I do talk about social media a little bit in here, and how in 2009, 2010, there was kind of this explosion, and how social media has really changed the game for all of us, but specifically for cosplay, it had made it into such a global phenomenon. And I just think it was like a perfect platform for cosplay, because cosplay is visual, it is, you know, fandom, it's, you know, it's trendy, like all the newest shows get people cosplaying them, and so social media is like this perfect beast to feed cosplay. So I talked about that. And then chapter 10, one of my favorite chapters to write, going beyond recreations. This is such a great phenomenon that has evolved over the years, where in the beginning, whether you were a Western cosplay costumer or Eastern cosplayer, like it was very much so about accuracy, trying to embody the characters, do the characters as close as possible. And over the last 10, 12, 15 years, we have really gone beyond just recreating costumes. And there's this whole world of people doing alternate universe costumes, original designs of costumes. They'll take like a time period or a fashion period and do the characters, dressed in those fashions. A lot of artists are doing fan art of characters in different, styles. And then even the publishers and the official writers, they will create different canons for characters. I note the Batman series, where it's Batman through the ages. So you have medieval Batman and you have pirate Batman and such. So in a world like that, really, there's so much more creativity. There's like less emphasis on having to make your costume as accurate as possible, and more emphasis on using cosplay as a creative expression. And so I give lots of examples on that and sort of talk about how that developed. Just like people now cosplay memes, like the Bowsette meme, or people will sort of like explore gender fluidity through cosplay. And, here are two cosplayers cosplaying the same character, but one as the canon male version and one as the, a female version, and how that all enriches cosplay and makes it just a more creative and more fun community. All right, so my advice after this part is cons and photography. I was like, of course, I gotta like give some advice on how to prep for conventions, how to pack for conventions, how to pace yourself at conventions, as well as like how to interact with photographers, sort of like photography etiquettes, and what it's like to do a photo shoot and who owns the pictures and such. So that all will give you a good grasp. I'm gonna drink some water. Okay. All right, so the next part is called part 4, the duality of cosplay. And this was by far the hardest part to write. I think there were 4 chapters, and each chapter took up many months and many tears. And because cosplay is not all sunshine and rainbows, and I really wanted to not gloss over some of the pitfalls and some of the negative aspects of cosplay. And we have some problems in this community, and some of them have really persisted for many, many years. So I thought if I were to write a book about this culture, I really need to address them. So chapter 11 is sort of a intro chapter that really relates to myself and the negativity in cosplay that I've experienced. So, lots of trolling online, criticizing comments, sexualized comments, and just how in general, like to understand how people interact with you and how to not take it personal, and how to, sort of shield yourself from negativity. And like what was really important to me was to sort of reaffirm that we are cosplaying larger than life characters. So we are cosplaying heroes and gods and mythical beings that are perfect. They look perfect. They're played by actors who work out for 6 months at a time and are models and perfection, everything. So when we try to emulate these characters by default, there will be some people who will think, well, you don't fit my ideal vision of that character. And that's what I had to learn through cosplay, is that, if I cosplay a character outside of my ethnicity, people are going to be like, well, you're really good, you're really good, like Black Cat or Catwoman, but she's not Asian. So you don't do it for me or something. And so I really tried to make people understand in this chapter that you should cosplay for yourself, and that it's okay to expect a certain amount of negativity because you can't escape it, but that there are ways to distance yourself from it, because like they're kind of not talking about you. This is their vision. They think Wonder Woman should look a certain way. So great, that's for you. But I cosplay Wonder Woman for my own enjoyment. And in my mind, she could look like this too. Why not? So let's see. The chapter 12, I call the cosplay body issue. And that's a chapter where I start with the story of getting sexually harassed at a convention. And I sort of go through, the plights that we as female cosplayers have dealt with in the last, however long since the beginning of conventions, where like it doesn't matter if we are dressed sexy or if like our bodies are not like standard fit the standard of beauty. We get criticized either way. So like you could work out like crazy and look like a character, and they will say, well, you're working out too much, you're too obsessed, and you're probably starving yourself. Eat a sandwich. But then plus size cosplayers deal with so much judgment that it drives them out of the community. They have so many issues to deal with already, with like shoes and certain costumes not being available in their sizes. And then also they deal with so much criticism about their bodies, and like, just all these really mean comments. But then like if I dress sexy at a convention and people look at me and think, oh, she is desirable, then I get harassed. Like I found some pictures of myself at conventions in revealing costumes, just surrounded by men. And I'm like thinking back, like, how was I okay with this? And this was, I think it was like got really, really bad between 2008 and 2012. And it was in 2012 that this movement started called Cosplay is Not Consent. And it really was started just by the community, very grassroots, and like convincing conventions to put up signs that say cosplay is not consent, and people sharing their stories and talking to newspapers and online outlets, and sort of making people aware that just because someone is dressed in a sexy costume, you can't just go up and touch them and such. So that's what this issue deals with. And yeah, heavy stuff, but I always hope to approach it like with honesty and with hope, because things do get better. We are very vocal about the things that need to change. So, it's like I want to encourage people to understand these issues and be vocal about them, This next chapter is definitely the toughest out of the entire book. And it's chapter 13, Racism and Blackface in Cosplay. So I am actually implored the help of Bree Chibi Cosplay. She's here as Rainbow Bright on the right. She is a wonderful writer and activist in cosplay, and I wanted her to be my sensitivity reader for this chapter. So I had years ago already started drafting up an article on my own views of blackfacing and racism in cosplay, and she really helped me refine it into a chapter that would really like highlight the situation without making it about myself. Like, this is not about me. I interviewed Black cosplayers. I asked Black cosplayers to submit their images and also to share their stories with me. And then I, try to sort of explain the reason for why this horrible thing exists. And I don't want to get into it too much just here on the stage because I will miss certain things. But if you buy my book, please read this chapter. It is really important, just for cosplayers alike, like for all cosplayers, to just recognize that there's a whole community within us that is marginalized and really vilified and really looked down on all the time. And that this issue is really nuanced, and we all need to work together to make cosplay a more welcoming space. So, but yes, those are all my wonderful friends that submitted their photos. They all look so great. So my advice chapter following these three very, very heavy chapters is transforming negativity into positivity. So I give advice and tips on things that, I do for self-care, for how I handle online harassment, in-person harassment. I share ways that you can support marginalized cosplayers, and also like ways that you can find communities that are focused more on positivity and inclusiveness. I also have some charity like suggestions in there, just because I think there's so much you can do with cosplay that is very positive, that sometimes gets overshadowed by the negativity, and I hope that parents will like understand that these issues are here, but still allow their kids to join in on the fun, because cosplays, the positive aspects, they outweigh the negatives, 1,000,000 to 1. Really, it's very, very important. All right, so now we're on to the last part of the book, which is the industry of cosplay. So how cosplay developed from just a fan hobby at conventions, in the 80s, to now it is it truly is a million, if not $1 billion industry, where like it's like fan costuming, people buying costumes, people buying fashion inspired by costumes, and sort of expressing themselves, with what they're wearing to be proud of the characters that they're portraying. Like, that industry is really fascinating. So I start with my personal story, like I do with a lot of topics. I'll, tie it in with a personal story, so it doesn't come out of left field. So my chapter 14 is called Becoming Yaya Han, and it goes through a lot of like my early years of failures and experiments and things that I did to try to make cosplay a career. And I started in 2005. Like, I quit my job in 2005 before cosplay was an industry, and I tried to make it as a cosplayer. And then, so yeah, I talk about all of that. But because I've done so many different things in cosplay, like I've tried so many different things, it's a way for you to sort of see what is out there, what different career avenues there are. So, and I go right into chapter 15, which I call the cost of building an empire, because I am considered one of the most successful cosplayers in the world. Sorry, hard for me to say that, but I am considered very successful, and I'm considered a shrewd businesswoman, that I like did all these things and planned it, and I have built this empire for myself. And so this chapter kind of is like, all right, let's go behind the curtains, let's see all the stuff that see how the sausage is made. So I spent some time talking about my experience being on the sci-fi TV show Heroes of Cosplay. It was very controversial, and it was the first TV show that really centered around cosplay and showed what cosplay was like. In 2013, it came out. So the community was definitely not ready for it, and I got canceled for it, I think twice. And, yeah, definitely once very badly, but then, more than once, truly. And so I sort of go through, my reasoning for joining the show, my experience on it, and then also like the lessons I learned from being on Heroes of Cosplay. And it sort of ends with like my endeavors since, which are really in the sewing and crafting realm, where I really am trying to bridge the gap between the cosplay community and the sewing and crafting industry, and show them that cosplayers are a loyal and really dedicated market. We're customers that will shop your products forever if we like it. And and we're young. That's the great thing. Cosplayers are a totally new generation of customers. So I've been designing patterns for McCall Patterns and creating fabrics for mass retail at Joanne Fabrics and such. So I talk about that a little bit. Okay. Drink another water. I have no idea what time it is. Okay. All right, we're still good on time. I'm losing my voice. It's the last day of a con. Okay, so chapter 16 is cosplay as a career. So this is where I lay out what kind of careers are available to cosplayers. And I talk to some of my professional friends that work in cosplay. And so you'll see Volpin Props and his team on the left. They build large scale props and displays and statues and trophies for esports. So like most of the huge tournaments that, like the world tournaments, Volpin and their team, they probably made the trophies for them. And Meg Turney is on the right. She is a cosplayer who has or had a Patreon. Now she has an OnlyFans, and there are lots of cosplayers who are, doing monthly subscriptions and photo shoot subscriptions and content subscriptions in that sense. And they sort of blend modeling, pinup. Some veer into adult, but it's all still very like geek and cosplay centric. So that's certainly a valid career path. I have myself in there. That's me designing patterns for McCall. I'm sort of going the commercial route, I guess, like, trying to partner with companies and distribute worldwide instead of making something myself and shipping it myself. And that's definitely an experience as well. Like you don't have as much power or control or anything, but you can get your stuff seen, all over. Like my patterns, I went to a convention in South Africa a couple years ago, and people had my patterns. They could buy them in South Africa. I was like, whoa! I just thought that was so cool, that it was available that far. And we have Bill Duran from Punished Props. He's on the right, building a giant hammer, and he does a lot of educational content. So he does many videos, tutorials. He's written books about various costume making processes, and he's a teacher, and his company is called Punished Props Academy. So you can go to school and learn how to make things with him. And then my last advice chapter is just for what you need to know if you want to go pro. So this is more motivational, and it's sort of like again, like I'm being fairly real here. These are the things you need to consider. Are you willing to do this thing 24/7 for the first 5 years, and or longer. And what to expect, that you have to get a business license, you should trademark your logo and certain things. Yeah. And so that's the advice for people to sort of get maybe in the headspace, like, oh, I want to go pro, I want to do this for a living. So check out that chapter. And my concluding chapter, I had to put it in here because I have lots of pictures of me with my family. So I called the last chapter The Dream of Cosplay, because I feel like I came to the United States sort of like chasing the American dream, and I found the dream of cosplay instead. And you can see, so my mom is like the beautiful Asian woman next to me, and then the like the Jedi standing next to her, like Luke Skywalker standing next to her, is basically it's my stepdad. So she remarried, and I grew up in Germany with my stepdad and my mom. But then on the right, you see a picture of me in China. I went to a convention in China, and my dad came. So my dad is on the right, and Brian, my husband, is right next to me, and Robert, my stepdad, was there too. So it's been really amazing to be able to travel the world and be able to involve my family. Like my mom will come and help me out at conventions. If I go to Europe, I can go see her in Germany, and then we'll go to a con together, and she'll actually iron my costumes, and she'll actually like brush my wigs. And that is really like poignant to me, because growing up, she was not supportive of my like my love for anime or manga. So I do talk about that in the early chapters, where she and I really butted heads, and she thought what I was doing was really pointless, and we actually didn't speak for a long time. And it was like through cosplay, through the fact that I got more chances to go to Europe and visit her and spend time with her, and she could come to a convention and see that I made an impact on people. Like people were like telling her, like, you're Yaya's mom? Oh my God, let me tell you why Yaya inspired me to cosplay. I like, why what she's doing means so much to me. And she literally is like, I thought you were just dressing up and putting on too much makeup and showing too much cleavage. I didn't know you were actually doing a thing that made an impact on people. So like it was really cool to reconnect with my family through cosplay, and sort of have their blessing and have their support now. So it's very wholesome, and it is truly how I feel. Like cosplay has given me everything, and so I wrote a book about it. Anyway, so yeah, so I guess before I continue, like I do have like a couple I have like a couple slides about the writing process, because I wasn't sure if anyone would be interested in that. I'll go through it pretty quickly. So that's a picture of me con crunching, making a costume last minute, but I swear that's exactly what the writing process looked like for almost an entire year. That same face, that was me writing every day and just feeling like I can't, I'm going to be beaten by this. I've made crazy costumes. I've done some crazy things. I like dealt with a film crew for 2 years, but doing this book is definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. English is my third language. If you haven't figured it out by now, I was born in China, raised in Germany, and then I learned English. So while you can't tell that I have an accent or anything, in writing, sometimes like I get grammatically confused. And so that was a sort of a hurdle, and just the fact that I'd never written an entire book before, my goodness. And so the reason I even chose to do this book is because the publisher contacted me. I was recommended by another writer who wrote a book about something else fandom related, and they were looking for someone to write a cosplay book, and they were like, why don't you just talk to Yaya, And so I had wanted to write a book, so I thought that was like, ooh, this is fate. I need to do this. And they asked me to, like, the first thing I had to do was send an outline and a treatment I was like, what is that? Let me Google that. So like you have to write an outline of what the book is going to be, sort of like a fake index, like what's going to be in each chapter, how many chapters, and then you have to send them a treatment, which is like a treatment of your writing. So I had to write like 500 words of something, and that took definitely some time to figure out. But then I wrote like the scene in the intro, you know, like what it was like to go to New York Comic Con and feel completely overwhelmed. And so they accepted that. And then they made me a book offer. And so after the book offer, which involves like looking over contracts and negotiating and having sort of a timeline, then begins the writing process. Then you don't hear from them for months. And then it's just me and my laptop and just writer's block. So, but I eventually I figured out a way that works for me. Like I have to listen to music, but it can't be music with words. It can't be music with lyrics. It has to just be, I don't know, lo-fi music. And I have to like be very comfortable in like a specific time. And I have to like get up and just sit down and write. I'm not allowed to get up. I'm just going to sit there for at least an hour and see if I write something. It's very, very tough, which is why I was really, really lucky to have a content editor. So the publisher's editor is like the overall editor, but they handle a bunch of different books. So they can't be there for you whenever you have a question. So I hired a content editor on my own, a writer friend of mine. We met through an article she did for CNN where she interviewed me, and then I was like, Colette, do you know of an editor who could help me like look over my book? And she was like, yes, me. I'd love to. And so we met every week, and we over Zoom. We met over Zoom every week. And, I could like share the documents with her. I could share drafts with her. And she was really there to help me, reassure me that my chapters were not too cringy, or that like I'm telling the story. I'm like, is it too personal? Nobody's going to be interested in this. And Colette is like, no, I want to hear more about that. And so she gave me a lot of confidence, and really helped me put the book together. Of course, like I had Bree Chibi for the chapter in the Duality of Cosplay, and I also sent chapters to friends. Like every once in a while, I would send a chapter to a friend and just be like, you know a lot about this topic. What do you think? Am I portraying this correctly? And sort of getting their opinions. And then once I felt good about the manuscript, which was many, many, many months later, eventually we got to a point where the manuscript was fairly solid. I submitted it for editing. That's where the copy editors came from, where they go through and make sure the sentences are right. They fix grammatical issues and typos and stuff. And I was tasked with finding images for the book, which was another months, because my book, I wanted it to be very full of images, but I didn't realize that like most of it, if I wanted the shots that I wanted, I had to be the one to go and look for them. So I dug through, obviously my phone, his phone, whatever personal hard drives, anything that we had from conventions, like just so many, so many photos to see what would work. And I also reached out to many friends. This is where I started asking for favors, like calling in favors that have built up sometimes for years, where I'm like, I really would like to put this picture in my book. Can I get your permission? So a lot of my friends were great. They submitted pictures. They went out of their way to search for them. Others, I had to do a little convincing, and then I had to get everyone to sign a release. So I had to figure out how to write a photo release and send it to everybody and make sure they signed it. So DocuSign is very good for that. If you need 100 people's signatures on documents, get a DocuSign account. pay for it, and you can just email it to them and they can just do it. Click, 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 and it's done. And thankfully, I did not have to do the layout. They had a whole, that's the one good thing about going through a publisher, is they already have a really great layout team. So they laid out everything, but I had to place the photos. So each of the photos in the book, I had to go through the manuscript and like highlight an area and write the description of the image, how big I wanted it, the like name of the image, like the JPEG, and I made a spreadsheet that like correlated everything. I was like, color coding, did I get the photographer permission? What's the photographer's name so they can be credited? And, it was definitely like huge undertaking. That was like big lesson. Like, okay, now I know how to lay out, a book. So the book was supposed to come out in April 2020, or May, beginning of May 2020. Obviously, that didn't happen. When the pandemic hit, we were in the middle of planning the book tour, and I had really scheduled my entire year around the book and the release, and which conventions I would go to, and which cities I would visit, and which bookstores I might go to. And that just completely all went out the window. And instead, I set up like little streams in my room where I'm like, like taking photos, on a timer on my camera, and I'm doing little book readings just through my Facebook. And so, yeah, it was very tough to release the book during the pandemic, for sure. We pushed the release back to August 2020. And when it came out, like I was driving Amazon sales. Like really the most that I could do was tell people, please buy the book on Amazon, or if you buy it from me, I will sign it. And what I really have like missed the most is sort of that experience of being able to talk to people in person about the book. And that like really hit me very hard, is to put so much of myself into this project, share so much of my life and my thoughts, really get more intimate than I ever have. And then not being able to talk to people about it, because like people can leave reviews, friends could tell me, I read your book and it was great, but you can't have in-depth discussions. It's like that's something that really needs to be done in person. And like, what did you think of this part, or do you have a question about that part? So I just didn't get that, unfortunately. And I'm hoping that with conventions coming back, I'll be able to do more of these book panels, introduce people to the book more, and give them sort of get that experience, like give them the experience of the book, but also get the experience of what they think and what feedback they have, and like maybe what I want to do from here. So yeah, I really had no idea what I was going to do after I wrote the book, because the world has been on a standstill. But I think I've talked for an hour straight. And yeah, so I'm gonna end it here, since this is my little this is the first time I'm doing this panel, and I'm open for feedback, by the way, on the panel. And if you want to read this book that's called Yaya Han's World of Cosplay, you can buy it on Amazon, or you can buy it on my website, yayahan.com. Or if you are here, I have it at my booth. I have it with me, and I'll sign it happily. So thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see more people at cons. Yay!